Hello and welcome. In this lecture, I want to basically highlight some of the concepts for a C program. I want to describe the structure of a C program. Now we're going to talk about the details of all the syntax and so forth in other lectures, but I want to describe at least some of the things you saw in your challenge, just some of the highlights. Again, we're going to go through other concepts in more detail, but the first thing I want to do is I want to bring up my project that we did for our challenge. So I'm just going to go to File, I'm going to say Open, and I'm going to open my test.cbp, which is my project file. And so you remember this looks familiar. I just wanted to show you a little bit about the structure of this code. We'll talk about include statements and so forth, but one of the important things to understand in this program right here is this is kind of the basic structure for all C programs. The first thing you should notice here is this code on line 3, which is called main. It says main there, and it has two parentheses. Those two parentheses are signifying that it's a function. Now we don't know what a function is yet, but basically a function contains code inside of it. And so I want to describe to you that the main function is part of all C programs. It's the entry point to the program. This is what gets invoked when you run the program. Everything inside line 4 to line 7 will be executed. Okay, and so this main function is a special function in C that gets invoked when you execute the program. And you know it's a function because it has parentheses. And functions is just a way to organize your code. The things that you should notice here is on lines 4, you have a squiggly bracket, a left squiggly bracket, and on line 7, you have a right squiggly bracket. This defines the starting of the function, and then on line 7, the ending of the function. This is referred to as a block of code. So lines 5 and 6 is the block of code inside the function main. And again, I want to reiterate, main is a special function in C that gets invoked when you run the program. So there should be at least one main in all C programs, and only one main. Now, I'm going to show you how to structure the program with other functions, but this is a basic program, so it contains our main function, and this gets invoked. And then in lines 5 and 6, this is the body, this is the block of code for the function main. And you'll notice 4 and 7 start and end those functions. So what I'm trying to tell you here is blocks of codes and this idea of functions. These are all part of a structure of a C program. Other things to notice here is C programs are case sensitivity matters. So whether you use uppercase or lowercase, it's going to make a difference. So if I were to change this I in int to an uppercase I, it's not going to compile because that's an error. And when I said earlier that you have to pay attention to the details, I meant it. Every little detail in a program can cause a problem or cause an error. So case sensitivity matters, uppercase, lowercase. It makes a difference. The other important thing to notice here is in the uppercase and lowercase, by the way, are distinct. It doesn't, and also here when we edit our source code, it doesn't matter where you start typing your line. You can type it at the beginning. You can put everything on the same line if you want, some of it. However, I will explain that it makes it easier to read if you do some kind of structure to it. But you can do that if you want to. The other thing that's important to note here that's not a specific concept is that all the statements are ending in a semicolon. So that's a syntax detail that you have to understand. Now lines 3 and 4 and line 1, those aren't statements of code. 3 is defining a function, 4 is specifying the start of the function, 1 is doing something different. It's including some library that you want to use in your code. But lines 5 and 6 have semicolons because those are statements. And we'll talk about statements and so forth, but you do want to recognize that a semicolon is also important. All right, and other concepts that I'm going to explain, I'll explain line 1, I'll explain functions in a much more detail, I'll explain why there's an int on line 3. But really what I wanted to point out here is the structure of blocks of code and functions. And this idea of the main function being the entry point of the C program. So this simple C program is, you're going to see very similar things in all programs. You're going to see that main routine, and you're going to see brackets for functions. And that's really how programs are going to be organized. Now, this function may call other functions. That's a whole other ballpark. But again, I want to emphasize here the idea of blocks of code inside functions, and also this idea of the main routine, and then the semicolons that end. Now, the other thing here that you'll notice is I did indent certain pieces of code. And we'll probably talk about this more when we talk about quality of code, but you want to make your code readable. And what readable code means is, if I were to just write my code like this, and I would have placed things on the same line, it makes it a lot harder to read, doesn't it? You see how that's a lot more difficult to follow? But when I add new lines, and I add indentation after each line of code, it makes it easier to read. You can easily identify that lines 5 and 6 are inside of a block of code because it has the brackets. And they're specifically inside of a function called main. So the use of indentation, spacing new lines in meaningful names, will make your code more readable. That's the other takeaway for your first program. I mentioned the main takeaways for the structure of a program, and readability is another important one. But this is just describing, again, the structure of a C program that you'll see in all C programs. In the next few lectures, we're going to talk about some of the basics of C. I'm going to describe to you this idea of the include statement, this concept of displaying output using a printf, the idea of returning data from the main. All these nice little concepts that are sort of really common for programs. They're not a specific category. They're really just fundamentals. And we'll be describing that in the next few lectures. Thank you.